Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Cynthia Psencik and Armando Cervantes will discuss how authentic dialogue can help us make the changes needed in our communities. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be sent to you tomorrow via email. I would like to direct you to, on your dashboard for the GoToWebinar panel, you'll see some handouts, well, one handout of resources that Cynthia and Armando have put together for you all, and also a PDF of the PowerPoint. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenters today. Cynthia Psencik was born in New York City, and her parents are from the Dominican Republic. She is currently the director for the Office of Youth Ministry in the Archdiocese of New York. She holds an MA in religious education from Fordham University, with a concentration in Hispanic ministry. She also serves as Vice President of La Red, the National Catholic Network of Hispanic Youth and Young Adult Ministry. She currently lives in Connecticut with her husband, Evan. Armando is a first-generation Mexican-American, being the first of his family to have graduated college. He received his BA from UC Irvine, has a master's in pastoral theology from the Loyola Marymount University, and his executive MBA from Chapman University. He has over 20 years of professional experience in multicultural and intercultural ministries, serving a variety of age groups, but loves serving youth and their families, as well as young adults. Armando serves currently in the Diocese of Orange as Youth and Young Adult Ministry Director. He and his wife currently live in Orange with their 1-year-old daughter. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead, Armando, and make you the presenter so that we will see your PowerPoint on your screen.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Well, while Armando is getting ready for our presentation and placing our PowerPoint, once again, thank you to Ave Maria Press and all of the different organizations who continue to uphold the professionalism of our ministries, but also continue to provide us with opportunities for dialogue, for learning. So thank you once again. There you go.
There we go.
If you can see it.
Yes.
We see it. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, we're excited to be with Cynthia.
Yes, we're all.
Erin, for being with us and for guiding us and inviting us, right, Cynthia?
Yes, for making this invitation. So this topic, engaging in dialogue with our multicultural Catholic communities about race, faith, and culture. It's a mouthful, right? So we're hoping that we're able to provide you with a couple of practical tools and steps, and overall just some knowledge on how to even begin. But why is this topic important to me? As Erin mentioned in my introduction, I am from New York City, born and raised, but my parents are from the Dominican Republic. But not only that, I live in a multicultural context every single day. My husband is, he's Anglo from Texas, which it's its own culture sometimes. And in my family, everybody is married with somebody that's outside of our particular culture. My brother, his wife is families from Central America. My sister's husband is from Sweden. So these are conversations that we're having constantly. But not only that, I am the director, as Erin mentioned, of the Office of Youth Ministry in the Archdiocese of New York, which itself is a melting pot. We are one of the most diverse archdioceses in the nation. So part of my work is to engage and work with different cultural communities, and most especially with young people, in allowing our leaders to share their gifts wherever they may be. And when we do that through a variety of different, cultures, and upholding, like I said, the giftings of young people. So this is a topic that is dear to my heart, most especially because we cannot unsee it. It's everywhere. So this is why, I'm just so honored and blessed to be able to share a little bit about, our experiences with you all. Armando, how about you?
Well, same thing, Cynthia. You and I have known each other for a long time, and I'm excited. We're passionate about this dialogue, because if Aaron only gave me one word to talk about the multicultural community, I would say dialogue really encapsulates what we really need to do and engage. We've, in a sense, lost the art of dialogue. We can do a discourse, we do a diatribe, we do debates, but that somehow got lost. And I think, similar to Cynthia, I come from a background of my parents from Mexico, a Mexican American, but born and raised here in Orange County, California, Southern California. But the reality is my whole community, my whole family at this point is a multicultural beauty. It's a multicultural rainbow. And I love that, right? I am married to a Vietnamese. We have our daughter, Camila, who's now Vietnamese, Mexican, American. My little nephew is half African American, half Mexican. My brother is married to somebody from Guam. So, there's a beauty to this diversity. And when we were invited to talk about this topic, we said we don't just kind of want to hit one aspect. We want to be able to talk about the beauty of the church, because the beauty of the church brings that beauty comes to life when you dialogue and engage with it. So in some ways, we're hoping that this topic does the same for you, that through our conversations today, it can engage you, it can invite you to really understand it a little bit more, and maybe take a few steps to really engage race, faith, and culture.
That's right. And, and as we've been sharing understanding, right, Armando, what's happening in our nation, we're remiss if we don't, also honor everything that's happened, especially our African American and, and our Black, brothers and sisters, right?
That's right. And it's important that we mention them. I mean, we may not, this webinar may not be specifically to the African American brothers and sisters. We may not just be talking about the Black Catholics, the Black community in general, but it's important that we talk about how Black lives matters. And if their lives don't matter, then no lives matter. We as Catholics, pro-life community, a pro-life faith that cares for all lives. And so right now we raise and we stand with our Black and our African American brothers and sisters.
Yeah, that's right. And this is, again, unpacking a little bit of like, what are those things, what are those things that maybe prevent us just to take that extra step, that extra step forward. We're hoping that, as we honor each other as our brothers and sisters, honor each other in our dignity, that it'll ease some of maybe that discomfort that prevents us from taking that next step. But how about we begin with prayer?
Yes, let's do.
We enter this. We remember that we're in the presence of our Lord, and that we begin everything and all of our work and everything we do in our prayer. So we'll put in the prayer, and I invite all of you who are, I don't know if my screen is frozen or are you switching the PowerPoint?
I think I've already switched it. Aaron, tell us differently, but I think mine's already switched.
We're still just seeing the first.
The first one, yes.
Okay, let's see. Maybe I somehow got it wrong. Let's see if now you can see it.
Nope.
No, we don't see it at all.
There we go.
Awesome. All right, so thank you. So we invite you wherever you may, find yourselves to pray. Oh, we lost it again.
Let's see. It says on mine that I'm up and running, so I thought tech was.
Now it's good.
Okay.
It's good. Sorry, everyone. Obviously, when technical difficulties, so we invite the Holy Spirit to just come and, just take over any technological challenges that we may encounter during this very important topic and conversation. And we invite you at home or in your offices, wherever you may find yourself, to please pray this prayer, which you will find from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And so we begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. We thank you, O Lord, for in your love and wisdom, you created one human family with a diversity that enriches our communities. We pray to you, O Lord, that we always recognize each member of this human family as being made in your image and beloved by you with worth and dignity. We pray to you, O Lord, that we may envision a way forward to heal the racial divisions that deny human dignity and the bonds between all human beings.
We pray to you, O Lord, that we may affirm each person's dignity through fair access for all to economic opportunity, housing, education, and employment. We pray to you, O Lord, that we may have eyes to see what is possible when we reach out beyond fear, beyond anger, to hold the hand of our sisters and our brothers. We thank you, O Lord, for your call and challenge to all of us, that we may reveal your teachings and your love through our actions to end racism and to proclaim that we are all your children, heirs to the sacred creation.
Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So we know we have about another like 40 or so minutes just to go through our presentation today. So what is it that we hope to accomplish today during our time together? Well, the first point is we'll discuss a little bit about awareness and understanding, and especially how that how the wisdom of the church informs our awareness and understanding of race and culture and dialogue. In our second part, we hope to provide you with some practical skills and some possible action steps that whether you are a DRE, you are a teacher, campus minister, or deacon, priest. I know we have an array and a diverse, speaking of diversity, a diverse number of past leaders and and school leaders. So we hope that through our practical skills and possible action steps that it can inform wherever you may find your ministry and your work. And then leaving it open to some questions and answers with the caveat that we'll try our best to answer as many as possible based on our experience and capabilities. But towards the end, we will also provide our email addresses. So whatever we're able to answer with you today, please feel free to reach out to us at any point. And even if you want to speak about anything that either was unclear or anything during our presentation, feel free to communicate with us. Another caveat is that also our presentation is not exhaustive of everything that's out there or even just this particular topic. But we wanted to, again, most especially through the wisdom of the church, provide you with some kind of background and information, but encourage you to continue to do your due diligence to explore reading. As Erin said earlier, we have a great resource for further reading and information that you can download by the end of today. So Armando, where do we go from here?
Well, we're excited to journey with all of you. We're excited to journey with you. And our kind of first point is this whole awareness and understanding. This idea that we're all one church. And so how does this awareness and understanding guide us and inform what we want to do? If you're like me, you want the fixes, right? Give me the fixes. Tell me what to do. But what if I told you that we can't fix a problem if we don't understand it? And probably one of the biggest challenges of this topic is that most of the time we don't understand it. We throw words like race and faith and culture, and in of themselves, they're so dense in what they mean that we can't just skip through it so that we can get to the fixing stage. We need to have some awareness and have some understanding if we're really going to engage in authentic dialogue. Because if we don't, then we lose sight of what's the most important. So I thought as a way to kind of start us off, if you're familiar, the USCCB reminds us about our various brothers and sisters through families. And if you've ever seen or if you've ever read anything from the Secretariat of the Cultural Diversity, they're very big on reminding us about the beauty of our cultural diversity. And they say that church unity in diversity is a requirement of Catholicism. That actually, we could argue that it's one of the marks of the church in one. But actually, I would say it's in all four of them, right? In one holy Catholic and Apostolic church, we are invited to engage in all of those aspects. Right? When you and I talk about Catholicism, we talk about it being universal. That in and of itself, there's beauty there, right? We just need to find a way to engage it in its plethora of beauty. And so I wanted to remind all of us, right, in this awareness that we have these families that we're invited to engage, to love, to know. What are these families? The USCCB divides it up by the African American Black family, the Asian Pacific Island family, the Hispanic Latino family, the Native American family, and the refugees, migrants, and traveler family. The one that you might not be as familiar with is that last one. It invites us to engage our brothers and sisters who might be in the circus ministries, who might be migrants, who might be, because of their life experience, might be people who are traveling on a regular basis. The chaplaincy for all the airports is part of this ministry. And so why does it divide it in this way? Because it invites us to realize you can't just say multicultural and just hope that with your words and with your actions, you're engaging the multicultural church. Sometimes it requires intentionality. And so by knowing the community you want to know more, by being more specific, we can love, understand more these communities. Now, for our purposes today, we're not talking about specifically any single one of them. We're talking about the 40,000 level, right? Trying to understand how this multicultural beauty needs to be understood and needs to be made aware more in our hearts and in the way that we engage with it.
That's right. And, as we look in, as we mentioned earlier, in terms of like, the beauty and just the wisdom of our church, one of the documents that we'll be basing it on our presentation on two documents, but the first one that I want to bring to light, if you have not yet seen it, it's fairly new. It's only 2 years old, and it's, open wide our hearts, and you can just go there. And what I love, this is a pastoral letter that was developed by, Armando mentioned the USCCB Committee on Cultural Diversity, and one of the beauties, the letter that it really, really hones in and speaks out against the evil, understanding that racism is a sin and racism, is an evil. And before we enter into dialogue and before we enter into even understanding any of these other cultural families, we need to be able to take a step back in ourselves, our own bias, and be aware where it is that we're feeling. If these conversations make us uncomfortable, then what is it? So what I love about, in particular, this pastoral letter speaking about how many times, either individual or in our communities, how racism or just lack of awareness of race can show up sometimes willingly, but many times unknowingly, and most especially in the sin of omission. One of the important components and key takeaways from this letter, and I've read it already like 2 or 3 times because it is, if you haven't, it's only 32 double space pages. It just contains so much richness, so much reading, so much language, that can help inform wherever, even if you're having questions and conversation, there's just so much richness. And one of the most important components is our own acknowledgement of, again, as I said, our symptoms and our bias. And the first one is what is needed. And we know that as we began in prayer, the first thing that is needed for us to even understand race, culture, and the intersection of faith between that is our own genuine conversion and that of the world. A conversion that will compel change in order to reform our institutions and societies. And the letter goes to say the power of this transformation will be a strong catalyst in eliminating injustices that impinge human dignity. The second, takeaway of Open Wide Our Hearts is that everyone, with no exception, Catholics and all people of goodwill, are called to combat racism. All of us are called to embrace our brothers and sisters, and especially uphold their dignity. It's not just the job of the diocesan leaders. It's not just the job of, wherever you may find yourself. It's everyone's, or that person that it's not the job of the person that does cultural diversity or the person that does this. It's all of our job to be informed, to know, to learn, and to be sensitive to the needs of our brothers and sisters. Why? Because each cultural families, or each, all of us, we all have our own landmines, and to be able to identify that is integral to our conversations and dialogues. But in order to do this, we need, humility, right? We need to do the justice that requires an honest acknowledgement of our own failures. And I think it's on the next slide with that, to acknowledge our own failures, right? And also restoring right relationships between us, whatever they may be. Again, taking that step back, to understand, like, where is it, what is our own unintended bias against any particular group, those cultural families, and wherever you may find yourself in, in the nation, there may be some communities that are larger than others. And where does this discomfort come from? Is it from our own families? Is it something that we saw? What is it? And be able to take the necessary steps to restore any relationship between us. And then I love this. The letter informs us and inspires us that as Christians, we are called to listen and to know the stories of our brothers and sisters by creating opportunities to hear with open hearts the tragic stories, and not only the tragic story, but the stories of joy, the stories of triumphs, just to really know these stories that imprint our lives and that make a difference, in the lives of our brothers and sisters, in order for us to be moved to empathy, but also to promote justice, but also to promote and to be able to inform the work that we do. But in order to do that, it requires a lot of humility, right?
Cynthia, I love that it says listen and know. A lot of times you come to these things or these webinars, or you talk about, getting to know the multicultural communities. Everything's about, well, you need to listen. Yes, listening is extremely important. We'll most likely be talking about that in other slides, but the document makes it clear it's not enough to just listen. We need to listen and know. It makes me think in the Spanish, there's a word, conocer, right? It's not just know, like, oh, know some facts about them. Know something you can read in a book. It's like when you're listening, you're able to conocer, you're able to really know another person.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, like you said, you and I have known each other for now, like the longevity of our own ministry, almost 15 years, and we started, and look at you, you're Mexican American, West Coast, I am Dominican American, East Coast. It is 3 o'clock over here, it's noon over there, how much, of that. And still we're both, Hispanic background, but even like our own upbringings, even like our own, culture, everything is, defined either by our area, our socioeconomic status and everything. There's just so much. Just because we're both Hispanic doesn't mean we have the same lived experience. So,
That's so true.
Know that by really understanding and knowing our story and getting to know what made Cynthia and what made Armando. So,
right. And in some ways, we wanted to hit 2 documents to get you some awareness, because we wanted to make this intersection of race, faith, and culture. So when it comes to race and faith, this document brings it to life. And I mean, there's more documents that you can read, but if one that you can start with, this would be a great one. And if I read a second one, now this combines the faith and the culture piece, right? Building intercultural competence is oh, well, you have a picture there too, but I try to focus in thinking, what are the key takeaways for me about this document? And I kind of broke it down to 4 different points. This document was written in 2012, also by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, with the hope of engaging ministers to think their job is to grow in intercultural competence, right? Yes, we're having the dialogue now. Yes, it's politicized. Yes, the nation is up in arms on different things. But the reality is the church has been talking about this for years, and it's been inviting us to have these types of dialogues. And in this sense, this document in particular is inviting us to seek an understanding of culture, that we don't just seek it by, again, learning it from a book, that it requires some connection, some relationship with the person, which is funny because we talk about this all the time, even with our faith, right? It requires, it's not a transactional thing, it's a transformational thing. Same thing with people. You can't make it a transaction, or else you don't get a chance to know the heart of the brother or sister in front of you. So that's the first one, right? Seek an understanding of the culture. Cynthia, I love that you use that example. West Coast, East Coast, Hispanic, still very different. Still, I mean, I don't think I knew about Our Lady of Altagracia until I met you. I mean, you asked me Our Lady, I knew Our Lady of Lourdes, Fatima, Guadalupe, but that's, I never had heard of, oh, there's an Our Lady from our Dominican, from the Republic, from the Dominican Republic. I'm like, I would have never thought that until I met you. But it was that understanding of the culture that awoke something new in me. And in and of itself, that was a blessing. Number 2, develop your intercultural communication skills, right? It's not enough just to say, well, have better communication skills. No, it requires some intentionality. It requires some different type of muscles to practice when it comes to intercultural dialogue. You can't just say, well, I am going to talk to that Hispanic or that Vietnamese or that Korean. It's not even about that, right? I've been reading a document just a few months ago that was saying, stop saying, oh, people of color. Sometimes Black isn't included in people of color. Why don't you say Black, Indigenous people, and people of color? And I was like, oh, I guess I never thought about it that way. So I'm continuing to learn how to in an intercultural way. But if we don't engage in that conversation, if we're not constantly reading it, I mean, I love faith and I love faith articles, and that's what deepens my understanding of our faith, of Catholicism, of history. Well, intercultural communication is no different. It requires our engagement. It requires our study. The third one talks about expanding knowledge of obstacles. So this is probably to me one of the big highlights. We sometimes don't talk enough about the challenges that come with intercultural relationships and conversations. And so what ends up happening is as soon as we hit a wall, we stop. Or as soon as we hit a wall, we're uncomfortable and we don't continue to delve into it. But you and I as ministers know that it's when we work through something, it's when we struggle through it, then growth is when it occurs, right? So to me is a really important one, because we have to be careful that obstacles don't stop us from continuing to deepen our understanding. In fact, the document, I love the document in the book. It explains that it says the FIG complex. And I was like, what's the FIG complex? And it says the FIG complex is fear, ignorance, or guilt. Tends to be the three things that stop us from continuing a dialogue and conversation. We're either saying the wrong thing, fearful of the unknown. There's ignorance. We don't want to seem ignorant, so I don't want to go there. Or guilt. I'm guilty that, yes, I'm hearing these stories about the poor Mexican kid immigrant who has this. Yes, and that's the guilt in and of itself is not bad. It's the fact that you stop after you feel that and that you don't continue, right? God is moving something in you and inviting you to understand more, and we stop. So the number 3 to me, if I put a little star, I would highlight that one. And then number 4, this idea of ecclesial integration. How do we integrate rather than assimilate? How do we find a way to see the beauty of this diversity and bring it together? Because there's things that unite us, and we sometimes only focus on what divides us. So I hope if you have a chance, again, it's a very quick recap of the two. We try to keep key takeaways very, very short, but the hope is you kind of take time to understand these two documents, because to me, these give you the basis of awareness and understanding to begin good, intentional dialogue with our multicultural church.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting, even like what you said about like the obstacles that impede intercultural relations or conversation. As I mentioned, like my husband is Anglo, and it's been a learning curve for him, for him, especially because, he was just not used to my dependency on my mom, I'm very dependent, and I have to speak with my mom every single day. And for him, he's like, why do I have to speak to your mom every day? But, we've been married almost 5 years, and now it's almost like an expectation. Have you spoken to your mom today? It came through that, you were mentioned that, you kind of pushed, you work through it, and then it becomes, and I think you'll speak a little bit about acculturation, later about, what does that mean? But it only comes through intention to understanding why is it, well, X, Y, Z, and really having that honest dialogue, about it. So it's, it's just great that, it provides us with all of these, takeaways that and the FIG, if you can, everybody type, I think I'm gonna put it over here to make sure that
to remember.
Am I fearful? What was the I again?
Ignorance or guilt.
Ignorance or guilt, exactly. And so, yeah, but it's true, and it's true. And then we've been seeing that a lot, even on social media. All silence, people's silence has been deafening, and we hear that a lot. And, the worst thing to do, we're beyond saying the worst thing and apologize, is not to say anything at all. Right. And I think, understanding, those parameters would allow us to be like, okay, where, as I mentioned earlier, where's my obstacle? Where is that, that I'm struggling with right now? Is it fear? Is it ignorance? Or is it guilt? And what am I going to do about it? So, once again, right. These provide you. So, as we mentioned, I want to provide you with some awareness. Now we hope that during the next, couple of minutes, we're able to provide you with maybe how can you bring these documents to life, within your own context. So I love that Open Wider Hearts, as I mentioned earlier, it's a 2-year document, but there's so much resources already on how do you apply the document in your particular context. So they have a study guide. And what I love about the study guide, that they provide you with 4 different actual steps. The first one is listen. The second one is study and reflect. The third one is to respond. Well, study, reflect, I kind of put into one. And, and the last one was to respond. So when, I'm sorry, you can go back. When we speaking about, listening, some ideas, well, before is prayer, my apologies. As I mentioned earlier, we pray not to never cease praying ourselves and inviting others to pray for the conversion of heart that is needed, to only see us and not them or the other. So, it is our community. It's not once my community, and then there's a Hispanic community, and then there's the Vietnamese community, and there's the, that community. If we're parish leader, it's only our community. And when we start, having those conversations about like, it's them, it's us, this is where, we can get into that messiness, but, transforming our own language, our own viewpoint of like, what is the construct of, our particular setting, and seeing that it's only us, it's not them, and it's not the other. So starting, once again with prayer. I love this quote by Mother Teresa. If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And I just love that. I remember, the first time I hear it, I'm like, oh, it's true. And how often do we see that? How often do we hold each other accountable that we do, belong to each other? The second thing, and then again, a lot of these you can also find in the study guide for Open Water Hearts, is hosting listening sessions. But we know that takes skill. So if you're not particularly skilled, there's, people that can invite, like from the outside, that can host, and real listening sessions, but listening sessions that take away any preconceived notions, listening sessions that take away judgment, but really listen with the, with the objective and the intention to actually learn. If you're a parish leader, what does this look like with the Knights of Columbus, the Legion of Mary, with, with Lazos de Amor Mariano, if in Spanish, or the Eucharistic movement in the Vietnamese community. There's so many. How often are we providing opportunities for the different cultures to just enter in dialogue and share stories? Share what is it that makes you who you are. Where have you struggled? Where and also where where are joys. So hosting listening sessions and not being afraid of what's going to come out, but really listening with the intention to learn. And of course, as the director of youth ministry, I cannot, leave out harnessing the creativity of our young people. This generation is the most diverse generation that has ever existed. So they probably have, they have the language and sometimes even the tools that can help inform our work, and even like help kind of like call us out when we need it. And harnessing their creativity, inviting them to share their own stories. The other, when everything started happening after George Floyd and, and Black Lives and then Black Faith Matters and so on, I invited my 16-year-old goddaughter to share with me, and her cousin. We got on a phone call, and I'm like, talk to me. Like, I know I'm her godmother. We share, cutesy things, but I don't think I've ever had, and she's 16 years old, a conversation about like, what does faith and what does, being a Dominican American, and how does racism or your own experience. And she had experience of feeling uncomfortable in her own skin because of maybe a comment or two that somebody may have said about her at school, because she looks just like me, and it was just beautiful. It was just such an eye opening experience for me to just be able to give her the leadership skills, not so much, but like give her own voice to share with me, her her godmother, as opposed to just me being the godmother trying to protect her and steer her the right way and so on. But really harnessing on the creativity of young people. If you're a parish leader, the youth leaders in your group, if you have young catechists, if you're a teacher, creating some a club, or inviting the upperclassmen. There's just so many opportunities, but not but really understanding that young people are already speaking about this. And within our setting, we can continue to create these spaces for young people to do that, and ourselves being intentional about expanding our circle. If we only surround ourselves with people that look like us, then maybe it's time to step outside of that and seeing who else we can invite to help inform our own learning, and and what we want to eventually accomplish in our own ministry, but also personally, because it starts with the self, the conversion of the self, right? and also growing, in the relational capacity that is needed to build trust. The other two steps that Open Water Hearts in their study guide is studying and reflect. Wherever you are, examining your own hiring and contracting practices. Who's around the table, and is it reflective of the community that you're serving? And for your own self, visiting cultural institutes, museums, Holocaust museums, the African American, there's so many different beautiful, if you're up in the New York area, we know we have the Shrine of the North American Martyrs, and so much, like just so we can learn and inform ourselves, and inviting people from not difficult culture, but probably meant different cultural backgrounds to any of our, not difficult cultural backgrounds are bad, to our gatherings. And lastly, just respond wherever you may be. Challenge Catholic companies that we work with, whether that be publishers, whether that be any other companies that we work with, to really embrace diversity in their materials. Like, who are, we know that a lot of our materials are very Eurocentric, so it's a reflective of the diversity that we serve. I'm actually working on a project right now, to really take into consideration this current, Hispanic, reality, and a lot of like post-confirmation, resources, but also consider who's the leadership, around the table, and how we're really honing and owning, their voices and sharing it.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm so glad you're bringing up certain aspects that are very specific. We need to engage and be very relevant. And you talking, for example, with your goddaughter is very relevant and something we continue to do. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit to the point that I had made from the document that talked about that big complex and the obstacles, because I think we would be in trouble if we didn't talk about that. Be careful, because when we talk about action steps, we do stuff and we think, well, I'm on the right track, right? And it's like, it depends. Are you going to continue, or is this your one and done situation, right? I have seen many times where people say, well, I am very open in wanting to learn about X and do this. And similar to the way we sometimes treat mission trips, we experience something, we see it, and then we wipe our hands clean and say, I've done it. I experienced it. I learned it. I was there. But if it didn't change us, if it didn't transform us, if it didn't move us to action, then it's cultural tourism. And I've been challenging, actually, similar my godsons and actually some of my friends, talking about this performative activism that's kind of happening right now, right? It's activist right now because that's what the in thing is happening. But what about later? What about when it's not in the news? Do we still care? Because we should, as Christians, we should still care. And if we're not caring as much, maybe this heightens it, but it shouldn't end it. Simply highlighting diversity is not necessarily a good thing, especially if we're just using tokenism. A lot of times that occurs a lot. Selfish motives, personal biases, or prejudices. Cynthia, you were talking a little bit about this. Sometimes I think, do we need to learn something, or do we need to unlearn something? Because we talk about awareness and that's learning, but sometimes you can't overwrite some of the biases and prejudice that you exist with. You need to discern, identify, and unlearn them, or else you're trying to rewrite over them, but they're already in you, right? It's part of who you are, and you're not doing it in a racist way, in a negative way. You're simply just unaware and haven't unlearned it. I love this one, individualized piety. We'll talk a little bit more about this. We receive our salvation from living our faith with others. And being Catholic, right, is all about praying together as a community. When we're at Mass, it's the work of the people, all of us together. Yet somehow we latch onto this Protestant version of faith where it's all about me. It's all about individualized. And it's like, no, it's not about you. If you want your own personal prayer time, go and have it. But in Mass, we are bringing it together with our brothers and sisters around us, and we can't let that take over. Talking more than doing, saying things like I'm colorblind or I'm not racist. Bishop Sabra had a great explanation. I think he totally just kind of whacked me on the head when he said, I hate when people say I'm not racist. Yeah, that's great. That doesn't mean you're going to go out there and do something about that. I don't want you to say I'm not racist. I want you to say I am anti-racist, because that maybe it'll mean you'll go do something in order to stop that, in order to change the world, in order to bring Christ's love to fruition. So just some of the things, and again, it's not an exhaustive list, but it's just a quick reminder. Be careful, because there are things that we sometimes, for the sake of action, we sometimes lose in really understanding and growing with our brothers and sisters because of it. I think you mentioned this a little bit, Cynthia, but this is probably one of my biggest tips that helps me understand how to engage multicultural groups. This is what we call the process of acculturation. It came from a book called Pathways of Hope and Faith. Specifically, the book was for among Hispanic young people, but actually I have found it to be useful for all multicultural communities. And in fact, for most people, all of us are in the process of acculturation. Cultural groups are specifically in that process because in some ways they're wrestling two realities. They're either wrestling the engagement of the local or the mainstream culture versus the engagement or interaction of the culture of origin, right? So if I'm Hispanic, then if I'm Mexican American, maybe it's the Mexican culture. Dominican, for Cynthia, you would be Dominican, right? My wife, who's Vietnamese, is struggling between the American side and the Vietnamese side. And so what ends up happening is as we grow, as we learn, as we experience life, acculturation begins to occur. You don't just stop it. It just kind of happens through our choices. But what it does is it creates these types of realities for people. So people are either bicultural. They have somehow been able to balance both realities really well. I am both Mexican and American. I speak both Spanish and English. I'm bicultural. Or they assimilate. You know what? I don't want to be like my parents who speak Spanish. They have an accent. They're immigrants. I am no longer that. I want to be American and speak English because I live in this country. I've been assimilated, right? I'm either marginalized. I don't like either or. I don't want to connect with either of them. And actually, this is probably the hardest group sometimes to reach. This is the group that sometimes we end up finding going into gangs, for example. They don't connect with either the one society or the other, so they try to find their own, because we all need connection. We all need relationships. So the marginal group sometimes ends up choosing a third option, sometimes an unhealthy option. And the last one is separation. This person, imagine me, right? I don't want to be American. I am Mexican. Yes, I'm born here, but my parents are Mexican and I prefer Spanish and everything that has to do with Mexican reality. And these choices make my process of acculturation engage. And in some ways, it makes me be in a certain point in life. So why is this important to me? Because if you want to incarnate a good dialogue of multicultural, it's not good to just say, well, let me talk with Hispanics. Let me talk with Asian Pacific Islanders. Let me talk with Black people. No, it's not about that. It's about understanding where are they in the process of acculturation, because then you can engage the heart. Then you know and have a starting point, right? Mm-hmm. If you're speaking to me and you're saying, I want to talk to you in Spanish because you are Hispanic, so you must prefer Spanish. Yeah, if I'm bicultural or I'm in the separated group, I love Spanish. But if I'm the assimilated group or the marginalized group, I don't like speaking Spanish. Why are you talking to me like that? I prefer English. So in and of itself, to me, this is a great tip, because it does, or at least what I'm hoping it invites you to think of, it helps you engage the dialogue in a much more intentional way. You know how to start it because you understand the process of acculturation that person is going with. And how do you get to understand that? By talking to them, by getting to know them. We incarnate God by the relationships that we work with people, right? In one moment, one conversation, one opportunity, one encounter. If you don't encounter it in a loving, I want to learn, I want to get to know you way, then you miss an opportunity to really engage and know. Because I really think I know the Dominicans, so let me talk about the Dominicans with you, Cynthia. You're looking at me like, no, I'm sorry. You just asked me a question instead of coming up and thinking like you knew. But we there. I just assumed, and these assumptions are killer. So hopefully that's helpful as a good tip. Some other ideas, these really quick 3 thoughts. Internally, we got to work on ourselves. It's got to start with us. And it's going to be sometimes uncomfortable, but we got to live in that uncomfortableness to be able to grow. It takes intentionality, right? Intentionality externally. Start with your circle of influence, right? Who do you engage with right now? And if you don't have anybody, then who do you know that you might be able to engage? Let's start with one person, like I was mentioning, and let's talk about intercultural. How do we work together? It's not done by ourselves, never done by ourselves. We are strengthened by working as a team, as a community. Maybe you start at your parish community. Maybe you say, I want to go farther, but find a way to engage a larger audience. And lastly, I'll finish with this. Go live out our faith. Go make your faith incarnate, right? Go to Mass, live the liturgy, because to me, the liturgy in and of itself is the work of all, right? I have loved going to Vietnamese Mass. Do I understand Vietnamese? No, my wife has to translate for me. But I've been able to learn and appreciate the prayers, the spirituality, understanding Our Lady of Lavang, things that I would have never been able to appreciate if I wasn't willing to enter in to understanding what this real communion was all about, right? To be in union is the living the liturgy. Go to reconciliation as often as possible. I invite you to go to reconciliation. You might say, what are you talking about? Reconciliation? What does this have to do? When you and I go to reconciliation, it requires us to humble ourselves. It requires us to speak from the heart and talk about how we are not perfect. And guess what? That brings unity with brothers and sisters who similarly may not be perfect like you and I. But when you and I deny this sacrament, deny experiencing it, well, I don't have to go once a year. Well, I really haven't even had any mortal sins. We lose the opportunity to engage. We lose the opportunity to understand with our hearts. Sacrament of reconciliation is this beautiful opportunity to connect with the other. In prayer and spirituality, spirituality is a relationship, not a transaction. So grow in spirituality, because that will assist all of us in engaging with the other. Use the Emmaus example. The Emmaus example from Luke 24, he basically tells us what to do with his actions. He says, you walk together, you accompany the sacred act of walking, of being with, then the radical act of listening. And that sometimes comes with just being quiet, or that sometimes comes with asking questions, the right questions. Even if you think you know the right answers, right? That was Jesus. Jesus knew the answers to the questions he was asking, but it wasn't about him. It was about the other. And an empathic act of sharing, where I now share from a place of empathy, right? And so to me, these recommendations are a great way to our faith intersecting with culture helps us understand race. And my brother, in some ways, that's it. You want to engage authentic dialogue, it requires you to engage our faith, engage the cultures that will then lead us to understand and embrace and love race.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I mean, and it's beautiful, and I love that. You know, most especially Mace is one of my favorite stories. So I'm glad that we were able to, you know, end there and provide these, you know, next couple of minutes. Erin, on how are we looking in the question front?
Yeah, everything's looking great. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Armando. I encourage anyone who has not yet submitted a question to please feel free to do so now. We already have.
You didn't scare anybody.
No, you didn't scare. Okay, starting with Deacon asks here, in my community, language is a significant barrier to me. I don't speak Spanish, and many in our community only speak Spanish. I know a few words, but my learning is very slow. Any helpful ideas?
So my invitation to you is to what we would call identify and find your bridge people, or what we call in Spanish, te puente. If you find the person who's the bridge, right? I may not expect you, Deacon, to go straight and go talk to the immigrant who speaks no English whatsoever. That's not realistic, and that's not really where you should begin. You begin with people who do understand, who maybe you'll struggle with a little bit because they speak a little English and you speak a little Spanish, and you guys will make it work. But in identifying those people, you will find the people that will engage, assist, and support you. You want to go straight to the immigrant, well, then you're going to have a hard time because of the lack of language and the lack of opportunities. Don't go there. Start with your bridge people. They, in and of themselves, will assist you. Remember, we don't do this by ourselves. You find a community that assists you. Find those people, engage them, let them know your heart, get to know their story, and that will just give you much more credibility, engagement, experience, excitement to start engaging every Hispanic person in that family, in that community.
Great answer. So the bridge people, you said.
Bridge people.
Okay. Love that. Thank you. Rosalind asks, what do you think might be the major shortcomings of Open Wide Our Hearts?
Ooh. Well, I would say it's just application. In the end of the day, it's as Armando, began. We want quick fixes, we want skills, we want this and that, without really internalizing. And and just again, we have these videos just when Pope Francis puts out documents, Laudato Si and everything. And I think it's starting with that first point that I said, the conversion of heart. Unless people need to realize and understand and really be open to the conversion of heart that is needed to engage in all of the other things, then that's going to continue to be a major shortcoming. And the application and depending on settings, whoever is in leadership and their own process of conversion, their own process of engagement, as well as I mentioned, there's just so much beautiful language in there, but if it's not applied, it's going to just sit on a shelf collecting dust.
And it's so hard because like I wish it was longer. I wish there was more to it. But the is you also need to make it general enough that it engages the United States and then allows that to be contextualized in our local places. So so hard because I feel like that could be a whole webinar in and of itself. Let me tell you what I think is missing. I'm with Cynthia. I mean, you want the application, and sometimes that application piece really is done on the localized level.
Yes.
Okay. Adam asks, Armando mentioned that he did not know about the particular devotion to Our Lady for those of Dominican background. What other saints or Marian titles from other cultures can we discover that would help our intercultural competency? What can we learn about this topic from the Communion of Saints?
Oh man, so I chose a lot of images of Our Lady, and Cynthia gave me, we put them kind of together. I think Our Lady is a great place to begin. If you just go to Latin America, every country has an Our Lady, right?
That's 21 right there.
Yeah, so if you wanted to start there, that would give you enough to get started. And actually, her stories actually give you richness of each of those specific cultures. If you want to go practical, my recommendation is, what kind of a community do you have in your communities, in your diocese, in your area, and focus on those. If you have a big community from Nicaragua, well, then focus on Nicaragua. We have a big community of Vietnamese, so we learned Our Lady of Louvain. So start with the communities that are around you, because I don't want it to be just text and textbook knowledge. I want it to be applicable to the communities you're with. Cynthia, what do you think?
Well, no, I think like you said, each one of them, because of their apparition, and it appears and it embodies and it, I guess, incarnates, the local, community where, she appears. So that is such a richness to even understand the story. But it begins I can go on right now and study all 21, from, Latin America, but beginning where, the community understanding and asking, where, that particular devotion, what does it lead you to? What does it invite you to? And, how is that particularly important? I think it's beautiful. But yeah, even with Latin America, we can just begin to have so much richness there.
Sure. I shared with Adam in the question box that Ave Maria Press published Our Lady of Charity. Maria Johnson wrote this, and this is the Cuban devotion of Mary. So if you guys are interested in that, you can find that on our website too. Okay. Next question, Abri. How do we help people overcome fear and a feeling of walking on eggshells in a conversation, especially in sensitive and potentially emotionally charged conversations where people are afraid of every word they say being picked apart? Do you have specific recommendations for discussion groups with young adults? Let me see, with young adults. Also, what happens when conversations seem to go off into a divisive direction?
A lot of questions there.
I'll stop there.
Cynthia, you want to start off?
Well, as we've been mentioning, I believe, I haven't read it through, but I know there's this book called Crucial Conversations, and we know that there's a lot of that. And we began our, presentation by saying that it is a skill. But however, that should not prevent us from engaging in it. And because sometimes people just need to feel heard, no matter no matter what it is. And that's okay. If ultimately the intention is to find reconciliation within it, because at that point, if somebody is charged and they're coming from a place of hurt, we want to make sure that we validate what place they're coming from. Now, if it's a conversation that is just strictly about division, then again, it's what is our ultimate objective? And again, fear, ignorance, or guilt. It's going to be driven by one of those three. So which one is it? Identifying and be able to, enter with that, with that conversation. Now, if we're trying to just poke the beast, kind of like, what it is. But if it's about intentional, if it's about learning, if it's about understanding your own shortcomings, and even being able to say, I'm sorry, I don't know this, but help me understand. This has been my experience, because this has been my experience. This is why I understand about this particular issue. I understand now that may not be your experience. So help me understand and help me see, and then just kind of have, those kind of, dialogues, and not being afraid. There's going to be landmines no matter what, but, open wide our hearts. And even like just our current, a lot of the bishops who have placed our different statements in light of everything that's been going on. The big one has been listen to each other's stories. Listening, we should be doing a lot of listening. We say, well, we've been doing a lot of that, but how have we been really listening, and how we really, practice the skill of what it is that we want to accomplish in the end? Listening without judgment, listening without the need to respond, which is what usually happens. I already have in my mind what I want to respond to you, but I'm just going to give you the benefit of the doubt to listen. But no, leaving everything, humility, embracing humility, and just listening to learn, because that person has something to share. Armando, you want to add it?
No, I would say that the two things I would add would be, number one, don't be afraid to be authentic. I think we try to sometimes act like we know what we're doing, and we sometimes don't. We're learning, and that's okay to say we're always learning. There's nothing wrong with that. And secondly, I would say, almost we talked about this with Deacon about Gente Puente, find people that are trustworthy so you can have dialogue and conversation with, right? I mean, I struggle saying Dominican with Cynthia or Dominican Republic, right? Like I was like trying to but I don't feel I don't feel bad. She's my friend, and we know each other, and the more comfortable that we are, the more I can mess up, right? Mess up, because we are having a dialogue and conversation. So I wouldn't start having that difficult conversation with someone on the street, but I have it with her because I want to learn, right? Start slow, small. And if it's getting divisive, then again, be authentic and honest. You know what? I am feeling fearful. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm sorry that maybe I can't finish right now, but I'd rather stop than me, try and hurt you or say something inappropriate that makes you even more angry. But I'm noticing you're getting angry now. So how about we take a step back and maybe we can continue this conversation later? I don't think we do that because of fear of being told that we don't understand. We keep going, and that sometimes ends up hurting us more than helping.
Thank you. Michaela asked, do you have a suggestion for how to address these topics with youth in a mostly monochromatic parish without accidentally falling into tokenism? I don't want to draw too much unnatural attention to our students of color because I'm sure they already feel singled out simply because of the lack of diversity in our community.
Yeah, that's a hard one, right? That's a hard one because it really depends how well you know your young people and how engaged you're with them. Yes, you're definitely going to fall into it. My recommendation is maybe to avoid the conversation head on necessarily, especially if you already have that inkling that people are going to feel like tokenism, and focus on stuff that unites you. And if that conversation naturally comes up, then it's okay, because then it naturally is part of the dialogue. So start with commonalities, right? This is where I usually give the examples of, like, go with the arts, go with social justice, humanism, go with spirituality, things that that we all value, and that gets the conversation going. Let's talk about Our Lady of Guadalupe. And as we're talking about Our Lady of Guadalupe, these conversations naturally may come up, but it doesn't start with, let's talk about Hispanics right now, right? Because once you do that, then yes, you definitely will put people on the spot. Or in fact, if you have that one or two Hispanic kid, they're going to look back and be like, I don't know, what do you think? So it just puts in a very difficult situation. So I would kind of take a step back and see how else could you engage the dialogue where it naturally will come from, rather than hit it head on, if that makes sense. Hopefully that.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. I know our time is getting away from us here. And I know there were some unanswered questions, but we appreciate so much all of those who sent in questions, and Armando and Cynthia so candidly sharing your experiences with us to help us to all grow. I have included the handout as well as the PowerPoint in the GoToWebinar today, and the webinar is being recorded, so I will send you a copy of or a link to that recording tomorrow via email. And we always like to offer a little discount for you. I think so much of what is, for me, has come out of all of this movement recently, starting with George Floyd, is the need to read, to study, right, to learn. And so 25% off your order using webinar 0630, and that expires on the 10th of July. And we'd like you to join us July 14th, going kind of in a different direction here, but looking at the Sacred Heart of Jesus and how we can grow closer to this using this devotion. So please join us on July 14th. Thank you, everybody. Once again, thank you, Armando and Cynthia. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Blessings, everybody. Thank you.
Blessings.
Bye-bye.
Bye.